group is separation of church and state. And she has a real passion for separation of church and state issues. She is studying to be a paralegal at Faulkner State Community College, and her long-term goals, I believe, is to work in the field of like civil liberty and do a lot of advocacy. There's also something very fascinating about this young woman. She's 20 years old, and the Olympics kicked off this year with a performance by a group named Tattoo. She operates the largest tattoo fan site. It actually became more reliable in the world, in the entire world. It actually was apparently more reliable and more extensive than their own site. So they have come to America, and she met Lena, one of the, I guess, the redheaded girl in the group. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, very interesting.
They made 2 videos shouting out to my website.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Amanda, come on and share with us what you have.
So jealous.
Oh, I want one more thing before you come. The reason I invited her on her, when we became Facebook friends, she had posted a bucket list. And on the list, she said one of the things that she wanted to do, a bucket list is stuff you want to do before you die. And one of the things she wanted to do was to give a public speech. And I thought, well, this is just going to be a good fit. So, come on.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good morning.
Okay. Well, today I'm going to speak to you about the issue of church politicking. Does anybody know what church politicking is? Okay, good. All right. I will be approaching this issue from a legal and a historical perspective, so please don't fall asleep. Okay. Let's start with some examples of what churches may and may not do under current law. What churches may do is register their congregation members to vote, provide information on candidates and questions on the ballot, and sponsor an event allowing all candidates to speak. Churches may even support or oppose legislation with the stipulation that it does not consume a substantial amount of churches' activities. The only thing that churches may not do is urge their congregation members to vote for or against a particular candidate during the service, or in an article published in the church's newsletter, or on a sign outside of the church. But has this always been the law? In 1954, the United States Senate was considering a major overhaul of the federal tax code. Texas Senator Lyndon B. Johnson introduced an amendment commonly referred to as the Johnson Amendment to amend Section 501c3 to prohibit organizations from participating in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate. His amendment was accepted by voice unanimously and without debate. Now imagine that happening today with our partisan Congress. Some scholars, such as Dr. James D. Davidson at Purdue University, in his article, Why Churches Can't Endorse or Oppose Political Candidates, suggest that Senator Johnson was not in fact attempting to separate church and state, but was in fact attempting to silence anti-communist organizations who opposed his liberal policies. He provides in his article an example of an organization called the Fax Forum. The Fax Forum was tax exempt, and although they explicitly stated that no substantial part of the activities of this organization shall ever be used to propagate propaganda or otherwise attempting to influence legislation, there was sufficient evidence that showed that 3 aides of Senator Joseph McCarthy helped organize their television series. Those aides were his former assistant. One second here, let me get my paper. Those aides were his former assistant and his then wife, Jean Kerr, his administrative assistant, Victor Johnson, and his close friend and political ally, Robert E. Lee. They ensured that he received favorable treatment whenever he appeared on the shows. This was the beginning of church politicking. Although there were complaints against churches during the mid-1950s into the beginning of the 1990s, the first major court case began in 1992 and lasted up until the year 2000. In October of 1992, senior pastor Daniel J. Little of the church at Pierce Creek in Binghamton, New York, published 2 full-page advertisements in the newspapers USA Today and the Washington Times urging people to vote against presidential candidate Governor Bill Clinton. The advertisement was titled, "Christians Beware, Do Not Put the Economy Ahead of the 10 Commandments." and asserted that Governor Clinton's positions on abortion, homosexuality, and the distribution of contraception to students in public schools violated biblical precepts. Now, the group Americans United for the Separation of Church and State didn't like this, so they filed a complaint with the Internal Revenue Service against the church. The IRS launched an extensive investigation and found sufficient evidence to revoke their tax-exempt status. Now, in April of 1995, during the court case, Pastor Daniel J. Little went on national television of a now-defunct cable network and admitted that he did not seek the legal advice of an attorney before publishing the ads. He said, and I quote, "Why should we consult attorneys? We have the Word of God. Principle sometimes takes precedent over silly laws." So the church, represented by Pat Robertson's group, the American Center for Law and Justice. Anybody know Pat Robertson? Yeah. They filed a lawsuit against the IRS in the District Court of the District of Columbia. They allege that the IRS's revocation of their tax-exempt status violated their rights to freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and it constituted selective prosecution under the Equal Protection Clause of the Fifth Amendment, so they were singling them out is what they alleged. Now, the court didn't agree. The court ruled in the IRS's favor in a summary judgment, and then they appealed, and the court ruled again in the favor of the IRS. Now, in between this, the group Americans United for the Separation of Church and State launched an outreach program called Project Fair Play. According to their website, they have filed over 124 reports against churches to the IRS between 1992 and 2013, and they also allow citizens, you and I, to go online and report a violation through their website. In 2008, the group Alliance Defending Freedom, formerly known as the Alliance Defense Fund, organized an annual event called Pulpit Freedom Sunday. On October 5th, they urged pastors across the country to defy the ban on church politicking and record videos of themselves endorsing and opposing political candidates, and to send the videos to the IRS. Now, they considered it an act of civil disobedience to a law that they felt was unjust. And papers here. However, the IRS did not take any action against the pastors or the churches that participated, even though this has happened since 2008, and there's going to be one this year, and it's going to continue, and I think the highest one was about 2,000 pastors that participated, but the IRS didn't take any action. Now, why was this? Well, there was a court case in Minnesota that the IRS began investigating this church called the Living Word Christian Center in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, after receiving reports that it was transferring property and other resources to their senior pastor, which was against the law. And when the church refused to comply with the summons, the IRS petitioned the court to have them comply with the order. Now, this was a very different decision. The court basically said you can't audit the church because you have not designated an official to perform these audits. And so the IRS tried to issue a proposal to update its church auditing processes, but they were never finalized. So right now, nothing is really being done about church politicking, despite the fact that there's numerous reports. Now, in November 2012, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and a coalition of various atheist groups filed a lawsuit against the IRS. They alleged that their failure to enforce the ban was engaging in preferential treatment of churches in violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, aka the separation of church and state, and the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment, and also constituted preferential treatment for providing an exemption to churches in their form filing process. Under IRS regulations, all 501c organizations must file an annual Form 990 with the exception of churches. The Form 990 requires the detailed reports on revenue, functional expenses, activities, governance, maintenance, how groups fulfill their mission, and what proportion is spent on programs, management, and fundraising. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and other secular organizations have to spend thousands of dollars every year to file out this form, while churches do not. And in the summer of 2013, which was a big major win for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, 2 federal judges in Wisconsin granted them standing to proceed with their case. So this is going to be the first case on church politicking, and everybody should watch on the developments. So with that, I pose the following questions to you. Does the separation of church and state call for a ban on church politicking, or does it violate the freedom of speech of pastors? What do you think?
Do you really want answers?
Yes, absolutely.
Jerry over there, that's him.
Okay. Here you go.
I understand I cannot speak because I have the mic in my hand.
Right. I barely used it.
I'm Jerry.
Okay.
One of the questions that popped into my head that I haven't thought about in a long time is the fact that in the 50s and 60s, when blacks, African Americans, could not easily take part in the political process, a lot of church politicking was done in the church.
Right.
And people who believe strongly that that churches should follow their moral obligations and ignore the law at times often cite the fact that African American churches, particularly the ministers, are very involved in that kind of thing. So, do they have a case?
Well, we'll have to see, but that's very important. Okay, here you go.
Following, I got loud now. Following up what Jerry said, they actually give out sample ballots with the marking the names. Now, that you can't go after the conservative churches and forget the Democrat churches. It's either wrong or it's okay.
Right. And there's been many examples of churches endorsing Democratic candidates as well.
Yeah.
And they should not be taken off the hook because we happen to agree with them.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
I'd just like to say that Barry Lynn, who is a Christian minister, is the head of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and I've been a member of that organization for 10 years.
Wow.
How many others are members?
I like their Facebook page.
Just curious, why are churches tax exempt?
Well, I'm actually not really sure where the history goes, but I know that the Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional. The very existence of a tax exemption is not necessarily unconstitutional, but, we're seeing a lot of progress towards that in recent court decisions.
Hi, thank you for the talk. And I'm a long-time separation of church and state, so wanted to just put some twists on little things, and starting with the tax exemption. It can vary by state. Some states tax exempt the sanctuary, but if they have a bookstore, if they have a conference center, they can be taxed for those businesses, but not in Alabama. We don't have that sanctuary exclusion, and so on that point. On the ballot distribution, because actually I do some of that, what the people do is ask the pastor, can we leaflet in your parking lot? So the pastor, you're going to draw that little gray line, is not actually handing them out, but by giving permission, he is condoning the effort. What happens in the Baptist churches is they have a sample ballot and they put it on the pew. So if you could see how that line is, that some has crossed it. But I understand you don't want any line, you would like the line over here. So, but just wanted to add that to the discussion.
That's great. Okay, you want to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't usually use mine. Now, something that everybody should think about with this. Both of these rights are mentioned in the First Amendment. The right to freedom of religion and also the right to freedom of speech. So that's where a lot of the tension tends to rest. And where do you balance that line between where is it freedom of speech and where is it imposing religion, trying to impose religion?
What about freedom from religion?
And again, freedom from religion, which, again, not expressly put there, but again, it was implied, and, I hate to say, a lot of people don't want to go with this, but the fact that even though the wall of separation is not mentioned in the Constitution itself, remember, one of the framers of the Constitution, in a letter, wrote that phrase to the Danbury Baptists, no less, saying, we envisioned, not a sponge that lets things get through, a wall of separation. Absolute. Neither side is allowed to cross that wall.
I think a true wall of separation of church and state is
It's
impossible.
Right. It's an ideal, but it will never be reached.
Justices will Supreme Court
It
acknowledged.
will never be reached. It's an ideal to aim for. But
As far as enforcing the laws that we have now, we should force the IRS to enforce the laws that we have.
And that's the problem, like.
And
Right.
I'm not really sure, and our church is an exception. But I'm not sure churches should be taxed now, but ours should.
yeah. Well, we're a real church. Only real churches.
The government should just come up with
There you
a
go.
$7 million check.
Okay.
And we'll have
Some-
to.
Yeah, and and something to consider if we, take away tax exempt status, that gives them the right to engage in politics. That has a very strong effect that we need to consider.
Okay, there's two over there.
Okay.
I don't need the mic. I'm good and loud. Back during the re-election of George W.,
Right.
I used to go to an Assembly of God church, and anybody that knows me, yes, it was quite torture. Anyway, in an attempt to sidestep this whole, we can't officially say, vote for this person, one of the deacons, because the minister was on vacation conveniently, gave a speech on, well, first off, those silly libertarians, who knows what they believe. And you cannot be a good Christian and vote Democrat.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting
Ways
there
to dance
going,
around it.
yeah, it's like, okay, you can't tell me who I can vote for, but you can tell me who I can't.
Damn, don't tell me who I can.
Yeah, it was awful.
Y'all know I can yell over this. Back in the 80s, when I went to the wonderful Cottage Hill Baptist Church, oh, they loved me. You can imagine. Here to get our little girls. What they would do is put these little handouts in the bulletins, and it was like a survey. And the survey would be like, what do you believe about abortion? And what do you believe about gay people? And it was all the really right-wing, ooh, you believe this kind of stuff. And they'd get the candidates to answer. And God forbid a candidate didn't answer. Well, they must
What have they got to hide?
Yeah, that's it. But they'd always, you'd get the Bible thumpers who would always answer the questions the way they wanted them answered. So they kind of told you who to vote for without telling you who to vote for.
Right.
Okay.
That was a big fat hairy deal.
Yeah, it's pretty unanimous that the Republican Party is against these positions, so technically they could circumvent that by just saying, vote conservative.
Right. Although who's conservative enough?
Right, who's Christian enough?
So, what I'm wondering, given the tax breaks given to churches by state governments, I wonder where the line is as far as churches and hate speech go. I remember going to what was the name of the church? I can't remember, but a church right near the corner of Ziegler and University a couple of years ago. I remember going to a little seminar on Islam they had there. Biggest mistake of my life. But anyway, so they played this video from some pastor guy from somewhere, and he's like quoting stuff from the Quran. He's saying things that I guess are true. He's quoting passages from the Quran, but he's speaking in an authoritative voice as if they're things you should be angry about. And he's basically going on the whole rant. Muslims want to kill us, and then of course he just kind of veers off and pulls. I don't know where he got it from, but pulls some state Supreme Court case in Ohio from 1811. This is
I may actually know the court case, probably.
Yeah, this is less than 10 years after Ohio becomes a state. He pulls this out. I can't remember the details of the case, but he uses this as his proof that the U.S. was founded as a religious Christian country.
It may have been Holy Trinity versus United States, because that's the
Possibly.
one that's quoted by everybody.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wonder where that line is and how far they can go before it's considered, state endorsement of hate speech and all these things.
That's very interesting. Should we ban other types of speech, not just political
The church
speech?
is given a lot of leeway in what they can say and do. I mean,
Right. Well, the line to me is, as a minister, you're free to say what, just free speech, say what you want. But you're not free to take away my freedom of what I want to do with my body as a woman.
Yeah.
That's where they crossed the line, and that they pushed it so much that they made it that line there that they crossed.
Yeah, and another thing is you have right to free speech, but you don't necessarily have the right to freedom from taxes.
Is human rights and civil rights political?
I don't know.
Apparently nowadays.
What do you think?
I think it definitely is, because what we would consider a human right, such as gay marriage or something like that, they consider a sin, so
Right,
that's
right.
political.
I come from this from a different perspective, and I think everyone that talks about this topic forgets the history of religions. And of course, growing up as a child, I was taught about the wars of religion, especially in the 15th, 16th century, where thousands of Catholics slaughtered thousands of Protestants. And then, of course, this went on into the 20th century with the Irish and the War of the Roses, which still really continues to this day. And so to me, anybody with any common sense knows that the church needs to be controlled. In France, for example, all churches are controlled by the state. They are required to pay taxes. It is actually a token, I think, which represents €1, but it's to show that the government is in charge and that you live in a clerical society where you have freedom to pray and believe in whatever you want. But the church is not allowed to run the state. And if you have any doubt of the problems, we have, of course, the Muslim states, and of course we have Israel. And when we see what religion and what the extremist Orthodox do in the state of Israel, as a human being, as a Christian, you're embarrassed. And if we are not, then something is wrong.
At least the new program isn't.
Got to the heart of the issue right there. Okay.
Let us not forget that when the church was in charge, they tortured thousands, hundreds of thousands of people and murdered
Right.
thousands of people.
And we're seeing that,
for
like you said, in the Middle
disagreeing
East.
with the church.
Still today, we see that.
We see in Africa, Christians killing,
Yeah.
Christians killing Muslims.
Little witch children too.
I agree that we should, that the IRS should follow the law as it's written, regardless of what the law was intended originally, and apply the law equally. I do think that churches, should be tax exempt as long as they reflect a nonprofit mission, like other kinds of nonprofits, and allowing them to engage in political speech or violate other terms of their nonprofit status is inviting all kinds of problems, and everything from money laundering. You could make a contribution to the church to get around the campaign finance laws, such as they are.
Yeah.
You could, and it also amounts to basically an unwilling, forcing your congregants to make a political contribution against their will, because some churches, many churches, have tithes, a certain amount of a percentage of your income goes to the church. That is supposed to support, the church's mission. But if you allow churches to engage in political speech, it's tantamount to collecting unwilling political contributions toward somebody running for office or a particular political cause.
Didn't the Mormon, isn't there a case against the Mormons for the Prop 8 thing?
I don't know if there's a case against them, but they absolutely got involved with that, and they single-handedly
Millions of dollars.
were the reason why it passed. Amanda?
You didn't mention the big cases with the Moonies. There was a big cases with the Moonies with Sun Young Moon owning newspapers and things like that. Whatever came out of all that. I know, did he not go to jail for tax evasion because it got to be so blunt? And
I'm actually not sure.
that's a big one to check. He did go to jail, yeah. But every time you hear about it, very regularly, there's a newspaper that gets quoted all the time. And it's always interesting because They're usually against people that say bad things about religion, and it happens to be the Washington Times, and it's still owned by the Moonies. And it's always someone, it's a newspaper that's always quoted by a lot of conservatives. And then we realize what the background is, it's always kind of strange to see that it's run by a bunch of Moonies.
Another thing, though, usually the penalties for violating the church politicking ban is usually just revocation of your tax exempt status and penalties imposed on you. I don't know if there's actually jail time for that. But
So where
something to
do we
be
draw the line? Do we draw it in the middle? Do we draw it to the left, to the right? Do we allow them to endorse, not endorse, even talk about political subjects in a sermon amongst the congregation during church services? Where is the line drawn? We cannot say that we can allow you to endorse this, but you can't talk about this. You can talk about this, but you can't endorse this or condone this, condemn this. There has to be a line. Someone needs to decide where. You can't say the conservatives can't do this and the liberals can do this.
Right.
The liberals can't do this, the conservatives can't do this.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Political should not be in it.
Right.
You make a decision. If it's separate, it's separate. Either disallow all of it or allow all of it.
Right.
That's the best way to be. You can't have that gray area in the middle and say, well, you can't you can't say do this and don't do that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. We need to find a line that respects religious rights and free speech rights, but also upholds the separation of church and state.
Well, I'm just seconding what he said, that I think it needs to be completely separated, and that includes endorsements and even going so far as to say pro or con against abortion or whatever. I think if it has anything to do with politics, it needs to be left out.
Okay.
But everything is politics.
Everything likes politics.
But the
That's
church
the problem. Everything is politics. I know, Dean, that everything is politics, honestly. I mean,
I don't think there is really one
Or political ban.
I think sometimes it's the moral issues. And the church, to me, certainly has just like we have the right to say, hey, everybody needs to have freedom. We're not going to have slaves in this country. Or we can say, okay, it's okay to have an abortion. I mean, all right, that's your choice, it's a woman's choice. But if a church's religious beliefs based on that, then they have the right, to me, to say, no, we don't agree with that. They don't have the right to say, hey, vote for Bush because support our view. No, they don't have the right.
They don't have the right to say that. They don't have the right to say, you can't do it because I don't want to do it.
Exactly.
I don't think they should.
Teach the principles and not.
Let's, it's typically, it should be standard that we only speak one time because we need to go ahead and close. We've got so much to do today. Can we go ahead and close and carry this discussion into our coffee time? And we'll be having dinner, and we have a lot to do. So can we go ahead and do that?
Thank you so much.